A major part of this course is working on a sociological research project. This lecture will review some key aspects of the research process, including differences between quantitative and qualitative research, developing hypotheses, as well as designing good survey questions. The research cycle varies depending on whether you start from an inductive approach or a deductive approach. In deductive research, in order to test a theory, you generate a hypothesis or research question, then you make some sort of empirical observations, which occurs through data collection, aka in this case, a survey. Once the data is collected, you analyze it to see what you found. Then you start the process all over again. In inductive research, you use the data to generate a new theory. It's important when you conduct a study that the results mean something to other people, even if they weren't involved. As such, we look for validity, reliability, and generalizability to help us determine if the results of the study are applicable to the larger social world. For validity, it means, does the study measure what it is intended to measure? In terms of reliability, the question you ask is, if you conduct the study again, will you get the same results? In terms of generalizability, the question you may ask is, will the findings of this study apply to some other population or group of people? If you can answer yes to all those questions, you're off to a good start. There are generally two overarching ways in which research is created. Quantitative research focuses on numerical analysis in order to apply to a larger population. Quantitative research can come in the form of surveys, experimental designs, content analyses, which essentially is just counting things in articles, images, etc. Whereas qualitative methods use words instead of numbers, identifying phenomena in smaller groups or individuals. This means it's only generalizable to small subsets of the population. Qualitative research can be in the form of interviews, focus groups, observations, among others. When you're conducting quantitative research, we often focus on variables. A dependent variable is the outcome that a researcher is trying to explain. For example, your study will try to explain why youth athletes drop out of sport. An independent variable is a measured factor that the researcher believes has an impact on the dependent variable. So things like bad coaching, pressure from parents, injury are all independent variables that may lead to athletes quitting youth sport. In quantitative research, a hypothesis is often tested, or multiple hypotheses are tested. A hypothesis is a proposed relationship between two variables, represented by either the null hypothesis or an alternative hypothesis. A null hypothesis states that there's no relationship between the variables. So if we're studying, again, why athletes drop out of youth sport, you would say that the null hypothesis is that injury does not affect athletes dropping out of youth sport. The alternative hypothesis would be that injury leads to youth athletes dropping out of sport. When working with people, researchers often must meet some sort of codified standards, which are set by professional associations, academic institutions, or research centers. Most projects involving humans at Fort Lewis College must go through the Institutional Review Board. The Institutional Review Board reviews applications to ensure that researchers guard against three things: causing physical, emotional, or psychological harm to their subjects, that the participants understand what they're getting themselves into. Those are informed consent forms so that they have something to read that tells them about the study. And also the Institutional Review Board tries to ensure that researchers make it clear to participants that their participation is voluntary, meaning they can say no. If they start the study, they can also opt out at any time. When you're putting together your survey for the project, there are several keys to keep in mind. The first is asking single-barreled questions. That means you ask one question at a time, so you get one answer at a time. If you start stringing together 3 different questions within one, and there's only one response, that's going to mess your data up. The second and third, using clear scales and creating scales that don't overlap, means that you need to make sure the increments are clear to participants. So if you're going to use a Likert scale, like a 1 to 5, you put 1 equals strongly disagree, 5 equals strongly agree, and then in between it's clear that it's agree, neutral, or something to that effect so that they understand there's a difference. And then if you're going to ask participants, for example, like how long they've played sport, you want to use scales that are like a 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, so that it's not a 1 to 3, a 3 to 4, because again, it will mess your data up and you won't get accurate answers. Some additional keys to keep in mind are that it may be obvious, but you need to ask people questions that get at your hypothesis or research question that they can actually answer. You also need to use very clear language so that people understand the question, otherwise they may not give you information that's accurate to their experiences. In terms of social desirability, this means that people may answer a question in a way that is socially desirable, meaning that society thinks this way. I want to look like a good person, so I'm going to answer in a way that makes me look like a good person, but it may not actually reflect their feelings or experiences. And then finally, you want to allow participants to opt out. So going back to that piece on voluntary participation in the ethics part, you have to let people know that they can stop anytime, or you provide them with a neutral option in the Likert scale that basically allows them to answer in a way that is essentially an opt-out. Sociologists conduct research in a number of different ways under both the quantitative and qualitative frameworks. As part of the course, you utilize the quantitative method of a survey to examine why people drop out of youth sports. Hence, the lecture focused primarily on quantitative types of research. There are several keys to creating good survey questions, most of which center around creating clear and easy to understand questions so that you can gain data that will help you answer your research question or hypothesis.